Hello, I'm Jeremy Hinks. Welcome to this session on surfing the urge in creative conversations. Broadly, it's about the importance of communication in the creative process, and it is based on the assumption that creativity, for most of us, is not something carried out in isolation. While we might feel we are the originator of an idea, its development will almost always involve sharing it with other people. Having shared it, we might then expect to receive feedback from those people. And the development of the idea will depend on how we are first open to hearing that feedback, and second to how open we are in integrating it into our own thinking. This session looks at how we might maintain that openness in our creative conversations by understanding something about the triggers which might shut us down. The discussion will be about our response to socially threatening situations. It will then introduce the SCARF model and how we might use it to support an approach over an avoid behaviour, particularly in terms of how we react to other people. The meaning of the phrase surfing the urge will also become apparent later on too. Okay, let's talk about our response to being threatened and its consequences. It might not seem particularly relevant to creative conversations, and it is clearly not a particularly warming subject, but bear with me, the relevance will become clear. To start with, I want to think about what it's like to be physically threatened. By that I mean having a sense that someone or something is likely to cause you physical harm. In such situations, our highly tuned self-preservation defence mechanism kicks in. Driven by the neural networks of our sympathetic nervous system, a whole range of bodily functions are upregulated to ensure that we optimise our oxygen intake and release energy to the appropriate muscles, those that control our ability to fight or to flee. At the same time, attention is diverted away from some activities which are less important at these acute times, for example, our digestive and excretory processes. Emotionally, we are likely to feel an increase in anger at the expense of our empathy. Our thinking processes take a more binary win-lose aspect, with our abilities to process complex information sidelined in the presence of threat. In short, everything is tuned to allow for strength and speed. Even in describing this to you, I feel a little uncomfortable as I recall the memories of when I have felt physically threatened. Fortunately, for most of us, those experiences are rare, and our response to them is only ever intended to work over very short periods of time before our physiology, emotional state, and cognitive function returns to normal. In short, being in a heightened state of alert and/or actual action is something we can only sustain for very short bursts. The aftermath, our return to normal function, is typically accompanied by a sense of exhaustion. What about social threat then? Well, first, what is it and when might it happen? Social threat arises from our interpretation of the actions of other people in any and every social situation. It might arise in a conversation between two people, either informal or formal. It can occur in any group gathering, for example in meetings or informal get-togethers, and it's just as possible in virtual connectivity as it is in face-to-face meetings. It can occur in crowds where we might feel ill at ease with the sheer weight of numbers of other people, or the uncertainty of dealing with so many people who we don't know. In all of these situations, we are constantly scanning social interactions to differentiate between those that offer a potential reward and those that might represent a possible threat. Those stimuli believed to be a social threat encourage an avoid response, which is similar to our response to physical threat. In socially threatening situations, there are physical, emotional, and cognitive consequences, just the same as with physical threat, although they may be rather less intense, less acute, and maybe not quite so instantaneous. You will have your own unique physical response to social threats. For me, I get a tenseness across my shoulders, a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, and although I don't blush much more, my neck still tends to go a bit red. So what signs do you show that are either known only to you or visible to others as well when you feel socially threatened? Our emotional response and what we feel as a result is unique to each of us too. What I want to focus on is the impact of our avoid response to our ability to think clearly as well. We lose that ability to analyse complex data and ideas. We tend to become more risk averse and inclined to stick with what we know. We are inclined to be less vigilant for those more subtle signals of meaning that we get from other people, and possibly misinterpret those people as a consequence. We may become more dogmatic and entrenched in our own ideas. We will be more inclined to generalisations and have a tendency to lose our sense of proportion, something which will leak into our choice of language and the tone of our delivery. So it's not great really, is it? A social threat can occur anywhere, either in the presence of other people or in our virtual connection with them, and in our reflections of our interactions with others, even when we are completely alone. Most relevant for today is that our avoid response can easily play out when we are sharing our ideas with other people, when we are collaborating, and when we are trying to be creative together. All of the limitations to thinking can come into play at the very time when we are wanting to be our most creative. Sounds a bit self-limiting, doesn't it? And most certainly it can be. Sometimes we stand in the way of our own progress if we're not careful. Given all of this, wouldn't it be valuable to have some awareness of the triggers that are most likely to cause an avoid response? How helpful it would be to understand what activates our own avoid response, as well as understanding how we might trigger it in others, whether it be in workplace or social situations. In this webinar, I'm interested in how this plays out in situations where we are sharing our ideas, ones that we have invested our time in and to which we might have a strong attachment. If, during creative conversations, all we manage to do is trigger an avoid response in others, or be triggered ourselves, then our ideas will always be constrained by the limits of our own capabilities. We want an approach response from people when we are sharing ideas, for people to know that their ideas are welcomed. This is where the SCARF model can help. SCARF, first described by David Rock in around 2008, is an acronym for what Rock considers to be the most common triggers of an avoid response in socially threatening situations. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Let's take each of those in turn. First then, there is status, a complex social measure which positions us on a spectrum of importance relative to other people. It is complex by virtue of the fact that status is a measure of several factors. Those might be positional or experience-based. They might be expertise-based or age-related. And all of these might be actual or a perceived sense of status. Status is then influenced by our own bias and is also defined differently across organisations, sectors, nations and cultures. Sure, it is complicated, yet I am thinking that one thing we can all identify with is how we feel when our status is threatened by people not affording us the respect that we think is due to us. Our sense of status is really important to our well-being. When we feel our status is recognised or enhanced, we tend to have a strong sense of improved well-being. Unfortunately, we are very sensitive to it being threatened, with that threat being computed as someone else trying to get one over on us. Sharing ideas, offering feedback and commenting on performance are all areas that are important in collaboration, creativity and learning, and yet they are all potentially challenging to someone's sense of status. One way of avoiding triggering people in relation to status is to show that you are listening to their ideas by being interested in them, and clearly so. Another, in feedback situations, is to encourage people to evaluate their own performance before offering them your own view. C stands for certainty in the SCARF model. We are all more comfortable with certainty, and when it is stripped away from us, it can be tremendously unsettling. At a survival level, certainty relates to being safe, as it comes from a sense that I have experienced this before and I know what is going to happen. We tend to feel more comfortable in places that we already know, and we are warm to people who deliver on their promises, as, in this instance, certainty translates to trust. The impact of uncertainty on well-being is clearly being witnessed in the national and individual response to the COVID pandemic, in which the question of when is this all going to end is central to the anxiety that many of us are feeling. Creativity and learning are all about journeying into the unknown, so there is always a sense of uncertainty during these activities. Ways of attenuating this are being clear and expressing a vision of what you are intending to create, or the value of the learning that you are encouraging. Reducing uncertainty is about breaking down those big issues into smaller ones, whose resolution can be more clearly understood and recognised. On a more individual level, it's about always meeting the expectations you have set in the minds of other people. Our need for certainty is an influence on so many major decisions that we make in our lives. Where to study, what to study, where to work, career changes, relationship decisions, and relocation of our homes. If you think of your own experiences of these times, it is likely that the concern you had at the time was influenced by uncertainty in relation to the outcome of your decision. These feelings, when extended to the extreme, can lead to procrastination, indecision, and inertia. Autonomy, the A in the SCARF model, is about that sense of independence, control, and personal authority over what we do. And it's really important to us all. It's about having the opportunity to make our own choices. Over the last few decades, changes in the workplace, the increase in self-employment and the growth of the gig economy have all increased expectations of autonomy. Greater autonomy has been shown to have a positive influence on health and the quality of life. I have some lived experience of this in that my decision to set up my own business was informed by a desire to generate a greater sense of autonomy. Looking back, I can see that this has had a great impact on the quality of my life, even though I probably work harder now than I ever have before. A sense of autonomy that has been awarded, then being removed, can have a dramatic effect. How do you feel when you have the responsibility for leading on an idea when somebody comes and questions your right to have that role? How do you respond to being micromanaged by a manager or a family member or friend? While in most situations the removal of another person's autonomy is not deliberate, there is a darker side to it, of course, in the form of the controlling behaviour of bullies. Increasing the sense of autonomy in a collaborative, creative space might sound like a contradiction in terms. Perhaps the most important thing is to set clear expectations in relation to the balance between autonomy and collaborative practice. Having done so, of course, these expectations then need to be met. Relatedness is perhaps a more subtle trigger, as it is more about what happens in that relational space between ourselves and other people, rather than being something contained within ourselves. It's about our sense of being part of a tribe, or not. It's about our sense of belonging and being around people with who we know and who we trust. Again, it relates to our fundamental survival mechanism which identifies safety with who you know, and potential threat from people who you don't. Given that relatedness is an interrelational trigger, you will not be surprised that it plays out strongly in teams. A change in team membership will completely alter the team's dynamic. It's not just a difficult experience for the new person, it's also difficult for those who are already established within that team. Often the latter of these two challenges is actually overlooked in the workplace, as organisations have upped their game in the quality of induction of new staff, yet pay less attention to the needs of the existing team. Overcoming relatedness issues is achieved by doing something to make sure that you connect people and that people value that connection. Icebreakers are a part and parcel of this, and done well, they are a great benefit. Done badly, they can alienate everyone. A simple individual way of avoiding the relatedness trigger is to show genuine interest in the people in your team, and to get to know them as people and not just professionals. Finally, fairness. A social trigger that I think many people will identify with most strongly, as it's the one they experience perhaps most commonly themselves. There are many times in my life where I have had that internal scream of, "That's just not fair," sometimes at a level to the extent where I've said it out loud. It's not always about whether it's fair to me, more often it's about my sense of fairness being triggered on behalf of someone else or something else. What I know is that in each of these situations I have a quite strong emotional response. I become more dogmatic in my opinions, I possibly become angry, and certainly less intelligent. So in my pursuit of fairness, I become less effective. I'm thinking this description might well be true of your experiences too. Or am I just being unfair? In teams and organisations, being fair is about setting boundaries and expectations and holding to them. It's about being transparent and equitable in dealings with everybody. It's about ensuring that everybody's voice is heard, that it is listened to, and that is an integral part of the way forward, whether that voice was in support or otherwise. These principles are important in creative conversations too. I should point out, in all fairness, that the responsibility for ensuring that everybody's voice is heard is as much with the person choosing to give voice to their idea as it is with the people who are in the position to listen. So there you have the 5 scarf triggers that might cause an avoid response in socially threatening situations. Great to know, but how best to make use of that knowledge? As you are effectively your own social science laboratory, the place to start is by noting your response in socially threatening situations and accumulating data relating cause with effect. That process starts with noticing, such an important skill in all forms of reflective practice. What do we notice in social situations when we are being triggered into an avoid response? What do you feel inside your body? Is that the hollow feeling in your stomach, the sense of vertigo, a tenseness across your shoulders? This is all data that you can relate to what is actually happening when you feel these sensations. What happens to your habits and behaviours that others might see when you are being triggered in an avoid response? Do you blush? Do you fidget? Do you maybe take a more defensive posture? Noticing these is all data too. Finally, what narrative is playing out in your mind as you tip towards an avoid response? Sometimes only you can hear it, but you might also say it out loud. In either case, the language that you are using is also useful data in helping you recognise which of the scarf triggers has been activated. Having noticed, the scarf model then can help you to be curious about what it is that is causing your avoid response. Put another way, you can analyse the data you've accumulated throughout your noticing. Your analysis will help you to understand how you can be more robust in keeping yourself in an approach state, even when you are feeling challenged. It is also worth noting that you can make use of your trusted friends and colleagues to help you notice and analyse what is happening. Remember, they are witnesses to your changes in behaviour. You can give them permission to tell you what they are seeing. Having done so, you can connect this with what you are noticing about yourself and build a more robust understanding of how and when you are responding to your scarf triggers. Having noticed and analysed, you can then choose your behaviour, consciously selecting one over another on the basis of which is most likely to help you to achieve your desired outcome. Having done so, there is the opportunity to sense the reward in your chosen course of action, from which you can then learn and apply in future decision making. Putting it another way, you will learn how to stay in the approach state. And David Rock noted the importance of this, saying, "The approach state is a necessary state for learning." Putting all of this together brings us to the concept of surfing the urge. This is a term often used in the treatment of addiction. In the case of an addiction, the urge often refers to satisfying a material craving, for example, alcohol, nicotine, or other drugs. In the case of understanding your avoid response, the urge is what happens when you are triggered by one or more of the scarf triggers. Giving into the urge is like a surfer cresting a wave and then crashing into the surf out of control. Surfing the urge is reaching the crest of the wave, taking stock and achieving balance, and then making a choice that will allow you to reach calmer waters while still in control. It's an image that I like, and I can use it in my own mind's eye as I feel myself careering into an avoid response. At the crest of my wave, I pause for a split second, and in that moment, give myself a chance to choose a more purposeful path. Surfing the urge seems a fitting metaphor to conclude this session. Improving our ability to surf the urge in socially threatening situations, even by only a small amount, offers considerable benefits because of how common these situations are at both work and play. Collaborative creativity is just one of these many situations, but a significant one when it comes to successfully bringing together differences of opinion and synthesizing them into something that is better than the sum of its parts. I'll give the final word to Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, psychologist, and Holocaust survivor. It connects everything that we have thought about today. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Don't ever forget that you always have a choice. Thanks for listening.